So, I'm going to put this film in the back of your head.
That's right, yeah, that's right. She's out of shot.
All okay? Everyone here? Wonderful. Usually what I do with my Key Stage 3s when they're talking like that is I slam the table with my stick, but never mind. So, my name is Greg Ricks. I am a physics and mathematics teacher, or that's my training. I trained here at Brighton about 2 or 3 years ago. Before that was at UQT. Before that I was in LA, specialist SEND, specifically talking about autism and ADHD. So, when we're looking at cognitive, behavioural, and to some extent emotional as well, difficulties or different ways of thinking about things. Now, I do a similar lecture over at Chichester, but this is all about me. They use me as a case study. So, just a little bit about me to begin with. I have no A-levels whatsoever. I am currently on my 5th degree. Don't necessarily go together. My 5th degree is actually specifically on postgraduate autism research. I'm doing that at Brighton here, which is why they've grabbed me today. So I was diagnosed 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, which was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. I got diagnosed because they were expecting really high levels from me. I achieved A's, A stars. I think I got 1 B in maths, sorry, at GCSE. And then at AS level, straight down to U's. And they went, that's strange, that shouldn't happen. And so when they looked at that and they looked at how I was processing the questions, that was the issue. Now, interestingly, at primary and secondary, I did a GDPR request. I got all of the information back, all of what the teachers had emailed each other, all of the concerns that were raised. And they said, yes, he's probably autistic, but he's reaching the thresholds for learning, and therefore, we don't have any funding to go forward with diagnosis. So they recognised that was probably a social issue, not necessarily cognitive at secondary. Further education, big issue. My IQ is stupidly high, common sense, however, stupidly low. I'm very good at going, yes, I can do that, such as cycling from Preston Park to here, thinking, oh yes, I'll beat the bus, that'll be fine. I did that once, never again. The bike very quickly got sold again. I have common dyspraxia, which means I can't place myself in time or space. So sticking to a lesson timetable is a little tricky because if I go off on a tangent, suddenly it's 3 o'clock. The great thing about that is the students that really want to interrupt me, I make them the tangent spotter and they love catching me out. It's brilliant because they're the most unfocused students and then they want to catch you out and they are the most focused students. I also use different kind of techniques such as buzzing clock to say I've got 10 minutes left, different triggers around the room. My PowerPoints are not necessarily self-run. I don't rely on PowerPoints, but I really enjoy having, okay, 5 minutes, off you go. And I stand there and I just watch and I just see what happens. That is always quite interesting. So that's a little bit about me. I'm not going to go into too much detail because this isn't a course specifically about autism. You guys are learning to be teachers. So largely it's going to be led by you. I.e. ask me questions and I shall answer. No bank details or PIN numbers, however. So when we're looking at some things that you should be aware of, there's a great resource here, which is my website. Yay! Go on it, subscribe, please. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. Okay, gregricks.uk. You have a lot of things there, and I'm writing there from a personal perspective on autism. Okay. If you want to know where I work at Oriel High School up in Maidenbough. We don't have a specific ASC department. We have an SSC, Student Support Centre, and then we have our usual SEND. So we have two sections, one of which has ECHPs? Have they changed? EHCPs, that's the one. They changed the order. And then the SSC are for those students that don't necessarily have an EHCP, or have an EHCP but require slightly different support. That's currently going through a bit of flux at the moment. We've just expanded our LA hours, so our LAs now stay an extra hour after school and do tailored 1-to-1 or 1-to-2 or 1-to-3 interventions. We've just launched our Strive for 5, which is looking at students that are at the 3, 4, 4, 5 boundary and going, right, we're going to set them an hour of something optional that they can do that week to bump their level up. Okay. So that's where I work. Every Wednesday we have tours and experiences. You are welcome to sign up for it. You will have a tour of the school. You can ask any questions you want to. You can come and visit me. I don't know, blow myself up or something like that. Okay. There is one other thing I would like to just mention slightly. Many people might notice I walk with a stick. There is a paper out today suggesting that individuals that are neurodivergent have twice the probability of having a connective tissue disorder or having hypermobility, i.e. things that should be cartilage are instead very, very flexible. I'm not going to do the trick where I can dislocate my arms. I don't want anybody throwing up. This carpet is very hard to clean. But how many of you do a practical subject where you've got PE, art, chemistry to some extent? Just put your hands up. The issue you may have, especially in winter, you may have students that can't do their buttons up. You may have students who have really bad fine motor skill, but gross is fine. You may have students, like me, essentially a stick insect in a waistcoat, actually wobbling about the place. I have very weak core muscles. Ask me to do a sit-up and I just sit there. You know, can't do it, physically can't do it. That's something to be aware of. If you have a student with ADHD, with ASC, just have a look at how they're moving. Do a little bit of occupational assessment. If you want any more information on that, I work with Sussex EDS. They are focused on Ehlers-Danlos syndromes, and they have produced, or they work with, individuals. Jane Green, who runs Sussex EDS, has basically produced a toolkit, school toolkit for EDS and hypermobility. Okay. And you can access that absolutely free. You click on that link and it opens up here. Shows you what it is, how they affect pupils in school, and how there are many, many different types. Not necessarily genetically identified yet. It's not so you can take a blood test and go, yes, I've got EDS, no I haven't. Okay, it can affect everything from sight, heart, blood pressure, postural orthostatic tachycardia, so if you stand up too fast you end up not standing up. It's likely to occur in schools before a diagnosis is made because, let's be honest, the joints are still growing, they're still regenerating. By the time you get to my age, which is 26, which is not very old, you end up walking like an old man. The other thing to be aware of, I'm going to go back to this because this is where you can link through. The other thing to be aware of is that there is a disproportionate diagnosis of autism and autism and ADHD in boys. We still don't quite know why. There is a theory called masking where girls have a greater ability to mask those symptoms. I don't necessarily subscribe to that theory because there is an argument that actually it's simply that those symptoms are not noticed because we expect boys to be more boisterous, hence the word boisterous. There is no girlstrous. There is still a gender disparity in diagnosis. You have to be very, very aware that you may have an autistic individual and an autistic learner in your class that won't be diagnosed until they're 40. That happens. Again, if you want to actually listen to case studies, go on to our webinars, podcasts and radio, and Jane Green actually talks about late diagnosis interview. She's autistic as well, she has EDS as well, and she won't mind me saying do get in contact. She will also not mind saying please donate money, but you guys are students. That's very, very good. It's about 15 minutes. Gives you a perspective of someone that's left school and was aware that she was different, but not necessarily given that support. So that's kind of a brief overview, 15 minutes. So now it kind of turns over to you. Does anyone here have experience of working with autistic learners? Okay, who doesn't? You probably do, you just don't know it. The prevalence was thought to be about 1 in 100, then we thought about 1 in 56. Actually, having a discussion with people, I think it's more likely to be 1 in 30, 1 in 36. The likelihood is that there will be 1, or the way things are working at the moment, 2 in classes, depending on class size and the local area. Sussex seems to have a slightly higher rate, whether that's because we have more access to diagnostics, whether we have more access to talented individuals that are able to spot it, we don't know. So, if you take nothing else away from this, the differentiation that you're doing in your lessons, you don't want to differentiate to one person. Yes, you may have someone in that classroom that needs that differentiation, but that doesn't mean that they're the only ones that need that differentiation. Okay? So, the way I work in my classroom is that I try and explain to students, I try and be a bit metacognizant, i.e. thinking about thinking, and tell them, if this method doesn't work for you, tell me and I'll try and figure out another one. Seriously, do write that down. And always have basic things that you can just pick up. I have a small whiteboard, classroom whiteboard. I shall draw an image of it. Does that draw? Come on. Yeah. There we go. And it's just a little whiteboard. And it's a very basic task breakdown. So you have keywords, equipment, now, next, then. That way, if a student's kind of glazing off, and this may be an autistic student, this may be a student that's just had a really bad morning. If I start reciting things to you that you have no idea about, you're going to switch off after one sentence. You're not going to catch the next and then, you're going to be focusing on where do I write my name. This works for any student that is slightly unable to process as fast for whatever reason. Maybe it's just after lunch, maybe they've had a falling out with their friend. Maybe you've got an interesting fish tank in the corner of your room and they're just following the fish around. In which case, if it's a glass fish tank, draw it on the fish tank. The great thing about this is you can tick it off. Now, next, then, come and tell me. The end always is come and tell me. You then review it and then you go, brilliant, rub it off, do it again. Most of the time in lessons, I work in a lab, so I have tables. I can actually draw this straight on the table. The technicians hate me for it, but I can draw it straight on the table and then just rub it off again. Another way of doing things, now, how many people here are in English? Yeah, sorry, you might want to put your fingers in your ears for this one. Don't use sentences. You're going to hate me. Don't use sentences, don't use punctuation. Don't even use words if you can help it. So, if you're going to do something like set up equipment, I'm going to draw. There's my Bunsen burner. That's a really bad Bunsen burner. I'm going to go like that. I'm going to go, you need to put water in there. Set it up like that. They'll then do that. If you say 1, get a tripod. 2, get a Bunsen burner, plug it in. Don't turn it on yet because I don't want the room flooding with gas. 3, get your beaker, fill it with 50 millilitres of water. 4, make sure that it's all on top of an asbestos tile. No, it's not that type of asbestos. 6, 7, you know, all of this. They've lost it by the time that they've gone and got the Bunsen burner, and then they're going, now what do I need to do? Just match the picture. Electronics, that's another one. You can say, get a battery, get a light bulb, get a resistor, make a series circuit. How many of you could do that? Right now. Some of you probably could. But, okay, instead of giving them the instructions, I'm going to draw it on the desk. I'm going to say, okay, what's that symbol? That's a battery. So I'm going to draw a battery symbol there, stick it on there. There's my light bulb. So I'm going to draw it. You're going to put the light bulb there. I want a resistor. That's an old-fashioned resistor, but I like it. The new ones, for those of you particularly up to date, is that one. How many wires do you need? 3. You need 3 wires, you need 3 components. They instantly know that, and if you've drawn it out, they can go, right, battery there, and then they link it all up. That way, they've not got these components and got 7 wires that they've taken off another group, and they're going, I don't have enough wires, and all this, that, and the other. If you're able to simplify it down so they don't even have to use language, it makes it a lot easier. Those are some of my tools that I use that I just have. They require very little resource and very little time. All you need is a whiteboard pen. How many of you are reliant on PowerPoints? Don't be ashamed. PowerPoints are lovely. I like spreadsheets. I'm very good at spreadsheets. In fact, I excel. Thank you. And then one of my students at the back just went, Word. Really good. Point being, if you think about these weird and wonderful techniques that you can buy off the internet, or you can do, zones of regulation, or you're printing off different things and match cards and splitting up your worksheets, what you're doing is you're differentiating to one person. With this, you can differentiate to as many people as you want because you've got the resources to do it in class, at the moment, reactionary. You don't necessarily have to plan it. Yes?
I'm a bit confused how you use that layout on the left, so how does that apply if you're going to use it?
Okay, so let's say the classic one is making a cup of tea, but I don't like tea. Yeah, let's do tea. Keywords. Tea. Equipment. Cup. Milk. Tea bag. Kettle. Water. Now, of course, in English you would have book, pen, pencil. I always put ruler on as well because no one ever draws a straight line. And then you go, now, what do you need to do? What's the first thing you do when you make a cup of tea? Fill the kettle. Boil water. Then you're going to put everything you need in the cup, not the milk. Keep that in the cup. Wait for it to boil. Take that off. Pour in water. Now you can make this as complicated as you want. You could go now, next, then, pour in water, wait for me to come over. Yes, you've done that right. No, you've put the cup in the kettle. No, you've put the, I mean, ridiculous things like that. You would be surprised when a student is not fully focused on something, what they come out with. It's absolutely hilarious. I was talking about energy transfers, and one of my top students, really bright, I said, right, what don't you want to come out of a light bulb? Water! I was like, yes, you're technically correct, but we were looking for heat. Talking about efficiency. It's really quite funny. I did a whole perfect PowerPoint. You know, one of those lessons where it just goes really well. You think everyone's engaged. And I, put a question out. I had the calculation up and everything, and we'd gone through an example, we'd modelled it. Right, what's speed? It's a drug! This is physics. Year 10. Top class. But the connections in the brain that you think they've made is not always the same. And so if you split it up like that, what you're doing is you're saying, actually, I don't need to think about the next bits because it's there. Sometimes students do this by themselves. You might have students that doodle. You might have students that put things in the side of their notes. It's a complete mess, but it works for them. That's a way of brain dumping, which is, again, brilliant. How many of you wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and think, oh, I haven't done this? Anyone? Yeah. Just me? Yes. How many of you have put a book by the side of your bed that you can write down into and then turn over and go back to sleep again? Me. Yeah, right. You guys, do it. It's brilliant. Same thing works when you're in class. If you give a student the ability to, at the bottom of their page, put anything down they want to, or I'm playing football after school, I'll do this, I'm doing that, gets it out of their brain. Ideally, and a lot of my students look at me as though I've gone completely mad, I say to them, don't use your brain. In year 6 and year 5, we teach them to do mental mathematics. In year 7 and year 8, most of the time we want them to do the mathematics on the paper. In year 10, you lose marks if you don't do the mathematics on the paper. Don't use your brain, use the paper. Eventually you're going to get to the point where you can't do the calculations in your brain unless you cheat, which is what I do. I know the questions beforehand, I made them. And then I just remember the order of the numbers instead. That works quite well, brain dumping. Discard that. Cornell note-taking. If you teach your students to do this, you will suddenly find their books become a lot easier to read. Yeah, okay. You have your A4 paper. Okay. And you split it into 3 big kind of sections like that. Here, you put all the keywords. Keywords, equations, anybody arty? Art here? So you'd go, right, what are the principles of art? Well, line, colour, shape, composition, blah, 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 blah. Here, they make all the notes. This is what you need specifically for the lesson. What's the title? What's the date? Make all the notes. Make sketches. That is for the student. Now, this bit at the bottom generally works in Key Stage 4 better, but some of my Key Stage 3 works really well as well. I say to them, don't do anything here in the lesson. Go home, your homework is to summarise all of this in this bit here. That's your summary. That's then re-going over it. Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, anyone? It's really, really good. And then, if they're revising for an end of unit test, all they need to do here is go, right, read over this, do you remember it? Smiley face. No idea. Oh my god, I need to ask the teacher. That way, if you say to them, right, as part of your revision, you're going to go over all the notes you've made. If you haven't summarised them, summarise them. If you haven't judged yourself with a bit of metacognitive thinking, go and do that. You've got Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, you've got a bit of metacognition. Yes, I'm talking about your sets 2s and 1s, but actually by the time you get to GCSE, you want all of your students doing this. At A level, they should almost be doing this automatically. At degree, how many of you actually make notes in a structured way? English, very wordy. Arty, you've all got doodles. Scientists, is it in the table? Anyone? Did you work in a lab or practical application? Because I have a student who has a chemistry set at home and his book looks like a lab notebook. I've done this, I've done that, I've done the other. It's all I've done. Really interesting, rather than just writing down the facts. It's, I've learnt F equals MA. Really weird, but wonderful. This is very effective, it's a slightly higher level. I've given you some things that I use on a day-to-day basis with autistic students, ADHD students to focus them, or just that little bit of on-the-spot differentiation. If it helps you, use it. If it helps your students, use it. If a student goes, I have no idea what you're talking about, fine. Mathematicians in the room. Any mathematicians in the room? Right. When they get the right answer but they use the wrong method, what do you think about that?
Depends. Is that method, does that method work, or is it an incorrect method but it just happens to get the right answer?
Yeah, I've had a few students that have made mistakes that cancel each other out. And they're like, no, you've got that answer by luck. If it's a method that works and it has what we call a consistent, a valid internal consistency, that's fine. If a student wants to doodle in their book the global warming, they draw up the Earth and they put all the arrows on, that's fine. How do you then extend them when you get them to label it? If they want to write it down instead, in a kind of a series of bullet points, how do you extend them? Anyone? How do you extend bullet points? Full sentences. Thank you, English. Or you get them to put it into a concept diagram. I love concept diagrams. They're mind maps, except you label the lines. Okay? So, again, this is higher level. We're looking at your top sets, key stage 3s, your key stage 4s, key stage 5s as well. Somebody picks anything random, any topic.
Forces.
Forces. Okay, last time somebody chose cows, but I'll go with forces. Okay? Forces. We've got F equals MA. We've got every action has an equal opposite reaction. We have an object at rest stays at rest unless acted on by an unbalanced force. How do I know what those are? Newton's laws, basically. How do I know what they are? This is your second, this is your first, this is your third. I think I've got that the right way around. Okay. What you're doing is you're labelling how they get there. In English, you would say, okay, point, evidence, explanation. That's actually your lines. So, I don't know. What books are you guys doing?
Christmas Carol.
Christmas Carol. So we've got Christmas Carol, for example. What's your point?
Scrooge is a greedy, is an avaricious businessman.
He's greedy. So there's your point. Your evidence for that is, it's called Scrooge, and that's kind of in the common lexicon, but...
His point is, knows something.
You're looking for evidence, you're looking for a quote, so you pop your quote in there. So, evidence, and then you go explanation there, and then you can support that evidence if you want to by making another point. In English, I must admit, it gets a bit messy. But that's English for you, I'm afraid. If you ever walked into a library, it's a bit messy. In art, for example, you guys, this is going to work brilliantly for you. You can give them examples of, examples of works by Kandinsky, for example, and go, right, literally copy in. So if he uses shapes, so Kandinsky, he uses a lot of circles, I think, doesn't he? I think. Lots of circles, lots of, broken shapes. How does he use colour? Well, there's block colour there. You can kind of go like that. They can either draw it in, or you can literally cut it out, stick it in. Maths, for example. You can do exactly the same thing. You can give them, sorry, that's me telling you that I've got to be in tutor, but I don't need to now. You can get your method and chop it up. Which comes first, which comes second? How do you complete the square? Do you take the brackets off first? How do you expand the brackets? It's more complex. It's your higher level, but we are not limiting achievement, which is really important. Many people go SEND, therefore they're going to be in 3-4, set 3-4. Not always the case. And sometimes if you go in and you actually have the correct cognitive approach, or you think slightly out of the box, you can get students to jump. I'll give you an example. When I worked at LBS Hassocks, we had a student commonly getting level 2 in English. We were doing Jekyll and Hyde, and just couldn't quite get it. I think that's because in autism, when we're looking at theory of mind, we're looking at empathy, we're looking at them understanding another individual. I say them, us. You have to put yourself in the character's position. That's very, very difficult to do. So instead, we were very, very into psychology. We ended up diagnosing all of the characters with different illnesses, which is brilliant because you've got your point, you've got your evidence, you've got your explanation. Within 4 months, he went from a level 2 to a level 7. Now studying at Brighton, what used to be the Polytechnic building down there. I can't quite remember, but he's doing game design. Absolutely brilliant. If you manage to crack that and think the other way, it can work really, really effectively. Now, it's easier for me because I'm already thinking autistically. I have to translate it into normal think for my students, which means it's very easy for me to be able to translate it back again into a way. You've got to think about a mind that you don't know, I assume. Some of you in here, maybe ASC, you don't have to stand up and wave. No, I'm not going to wave. Point being, I think in images. So I have to then produce my words, I then have to put it into an order, and then I have to say it in a way that I hope people understand. And then translate that back again. It's a lot of effort, but it does get there. So it's years of practice. Now comes the part where you ask me questions. I've got 20 minutes. I've tried to give you things that you will use. I don't want to give you the whole theory and history of autism because you don't necessarily need to know it. You don't need to be an expert in autism to try these out. If they don't work, what's the worst that's going to happen? You go, whoops, that lesson didn't work, and you expand on that. Whenever anyone enters the classroom, they always learn something. When you begin as a teacher, mostly the learning happens with you. The idea is to push it onto the students eventually. But there are always lessons where I go, that didn't work, but at least they weren't on fire. Most of the time. But most of the time now, I do my planning in a couple of minutes, and I go in, and I know, right, I'm going to do forces, I'm going to do Newton's laws, I can do this, and this. Differentiation I can do on the fly as and when they need it. Some students they can do something one day that they can't do the next. Okay? And that's with everyone. You have bad sleep, you have bad breakfast, the pressure is a bit weird. Students, for some reason, their brains seem to be forced out of their ears whenever it's windy. Has anyone noticed that? It's not rainy, it's not storms, it's not sunny, it's when it's windy that they go absolutely bonkers. And I'm sitting there going, are they powered by wind? I just don't get it, but that's that. So, any questions?
It's probably a stupid question, but
No such thing as a stupid question.
how do you encourage with student, not necessarily autistic student, but differentiation, like to be independent in a classroom? Because you said you're drawing it on the desk.
And then I walk away.
So you're literally giving like visual instructions, and what about if they don't ask for help?
If they don't ask for help, the way to do that is to pair them with someone that does ask for help, and then say, right, you're working together, and then what you've got there is a little TA, because if you're teaching something, you're learning it better yourself. There's a difference in getting information into the brain and getting information out of the brain. And ultimately, what we're training them for isn't to remember things, it's to get it out onto the paper most of the time. You're not developing that by getting them to say, well, no, I'm not sure about that. I've got this answer. You've got that answer. Let's ask. Now, the problem with that is that if you've got a class that is entirely ASC, as I have had, you're going to have a lot of questions a lot of the time. I've actually bought really, really cheap IKEA lamps. They go on my tables. I've got 4 tables in my lab. They have a square, and then the other 2 tables kind of go like this, so it's a T. So they're mainly facing the board, but there is group work. 4 tables. I put the lamp on the middle, and they're different colours: red, yellow, blue, green. Now you'd think that's very primary, but weirdly it's the year 11s that love it. I say to them, right, if you don't know something, ask the person next to you. If you don't know that, ask the table. If the whole table doesn't know, put your lamp on. That way, I'm answering things a maximum of 4 times, not 30. And most of the time, if a table put their lamp on, another table will go, what are you stuck on? I had a lesson, now I'm 2.5 years into the mainstream qualified teacher career. I'm quite early in that. I'm experienced in other areas, but mainstream, I've actually kind of done the SEND and specialist first, and then went into mainstream, which is not the usual way around. I think about 2 weeks ago, my year 8s came in, they did the starter activity. I said, okay, now we're going to do this activity where you're going to think about global warming, all this, that and the other. And I didn't actually have to say anything for the first 25 minutes of the lesson. They came in, books down, title, date. I just whipped the slide on to the next activity when I knew that everyone had finished, because when they finish the start activity, they turn the lamps off. When all the lamps are off, I know that it's done. They got on with it, they started discussing, and then by the 25-minute mark, when the timer was up on the PowerPoint, I went, do you realise I haven't actually taught you this lesson, you've taught each other? And they all went, oh, can I have your salary? No. I will note that's the first and only time that has ever happened, and I think that's more of a fluke. But it was lovely. It was really lovely, because I could sit there and I could just watch. If you spend most of your time talking, they're spending most of their time ignoring you. If you spend most of your time giving them an instruction and then waiting, they're going to start looking for something. Students generally come to school because they want to, because they're in a routine, perhaps, but if a student doesn't want to be in school, there's not really a lot you can do to stop them from running out the door. The point is, they will always look for stimulation in some form. If you give them that stimulation, either from their peers, either from instructions on the table, I mean, the best thing to do, I mean, art, you probably know this, put some colouring pencils and paper on the table. What's the instant they come in, they start doodling. And if you do that, first of all, brilliant starter activity. Second of all, then you go, right, we're going to make a Kandinsky collage out of all of your doodles. And you go, right, we're going to cut out a semicircle. We're going to, I'm not Kandinsky, sorry. We're going to make a school collage. What do we need to look for? Well, we need to look for lines that have a block colour. We need to, and then you're picking it apart. And actually, you haven't actually told them to do anything. You've taken their inspiration and flipped it. It's quite an interesting way to do it. If it works, tell me. If it doesn't work, not my fault. I'm not sure if I answered your question because I went off on a tangent.
Yeah, no, you did. You did kind of in that way because you work in a group, but we most of the time don't work in a group, so it's kind of in the lower classes when they start asking students, they start kind of like going off and chatting.
Yeah.
So it's kind of more the behavior management in that aspect.
Yeah, behaviour management is something that you're always going to have a struggle with because children, their brains are not fully cooked. Let's be honest, until you're 25, your brains are not fully cooked. If you're in the House of Commons, your brains are probably never cooked. If you give them something to do that they feel they can achieve, largely the behaviour will sort itself out.
Yeah.
It's tricky. It comes from experience, it comes from developing your own teacher style. My behaviour method is just out-weird them. It's brilliant. I have a student that's chatting to the person next to them. I'm going, I'm not doing any work. She says, I don't know how to do it. I go, okay. And I sit down next to them and I go, what do you need help with? And they went, what do I do? Well, question 1 would be a good start. She goes, okay. And then she starts. I sit there. She goes, can you go away? And I go, when you get to question 3. And she gets to question 3 and I go, well done. And I move off. They will do everything in their power to get rid of you. It's brilliant. Out-weird them. It works more than you think. If you say, I'm going to be your best friend and stay by you, they'll get the work done quicker than you've ever seen. You have to be a bit fun with them. You do have to be a bit fun with them. And I wouldn't necessarily do that starter task with the year 10s, or you might get a lot of penises. That being said, you could say, oh, you're all drawing elephants, but they're all upside down. Why? If you act as though you have no idea what's going on, which you actually do, you can manipulate it. It comes with your style. It does come with your style. Any other questions? Yes?
If a child with autism comes in and they are feeling very overwhelmed from break or something has happened there and they are sat at the back not sat wherever they are sat and have just gone into a slight overwhelm, is there a way we can help bring them out of them rather than just instructing them?
There are 2 things I do, and it depends on your relationship with that student and how much they trust you. They tend to trust me a lot because I go, I'm autistic, you're going to have to be quiet for a little bit because I've just lost my train of thought. And they go, yeah, that's fine. Children are a lot more respectful than adults, weirdly. Sometimes they don't notice. They don't notice their own internal feelings. And then you'll ask them to do something and they'll say, Mr. Ricks, you're being a twat. Apologies. To which I go, okay, do you want me to leave you alone? Yes! Okay, and I leave them alone. And then about 5 minutes later I come back and say, am I still being a twat? And they laugh at me. Because they don't expect that. And then that's them calming, then they start to chat to the person next to them and they develop the social and all this, and they start to bring themselves out themselves. And then I'll go back again and I say, I may be being a twat, but you can't call me that. Can we have another word for that? Okay. How about I need 5 minutes? That's more appropriate. Yes. Okay. So that way, if one of my students goes, I need 5 minutes, I'll go, fine, thank you for not calling me a name. And then after that, you get the little bit of a laugh, humour unlocks the amygdala response, then they can start to access the front of their brain where the thinking occurs. Generally, in response to stress, you have fight, flight, freeze, flop, or friend. Slightly expanded on the fight or flight. Now, in primary school, usually you have a friend. Why did you just hit that person? And they smile at you. The point is that that's worked in the past and they wanted to be your friend, so you aren't angry with them. Okay. Flop is literally just into themselves. Freeze is what's standing in the middle of the M25, you should probably move, help, help, help. And then of course you've got the fight, which is F off, bang, and then you've got the flight, which is out of the classroom. Each one of them stems from the amygdala response, which is a gland in the centre of your brain. It's actually two of them, looks a bit like a snail that's been run over, and it switches off the frontal part of your brain, the thinking, the personality, the impulse control part of the brain. So I quite like to say we don't have free will, we have free won't. Whenever I go past one of these lamps, I always want to go up and touch it. And then my front part of my brain goes, probably shouldn't do that. Not socially acceptable. If you have an amygdala response, that shuts that bit off, which is why you get teenagers kind of shouting at you. The other problem is that in puberty, the front of the brain actually undergoes a reorganization. It actually breaks and remakes connections. It's called remyelination, demyelination and remyelination. And so not only have you got the amygdala response to deal with if they're under stress, but you've also got that there is less connections in that part of the brain to deal with whatever stress there is when it comes back online. Okay? So you have to really slow that down. The trick is not to be infantile about it. If you start saying, are you in the red zone, they're going to tell you to F off. If you say something funny, like sad, sick or sleepy, and they go, sad, you go, right. Can I be silly to make you laugh? Probably not. Right, I'm going to try anyway. That kind of works. If they say sick, generally, that's a stress response. You get that a lot more in girls with ASC. I've had a stomachache. I feel sick. I've got a headache. Sometimes that's also can manifest as I need to go to the toilet. That's a physical response to stress. And the way I deal with it is go, okay, I've heard you. I'm going to give you 5 minutes and I'm going to come back to you. And I usually use the now, next, then. Because then in the now, I go, open book, title, date, get everything else that you need. They can do that. And then by the next time I come round, they've had a little bit of break, they've achieved something brilliant. Now, I want you to do this. Now I want you to do that. If you start to fight, you're going to lose. You cannot make anyone do anything. The only thing you're going to achieve if you start arguing with them, you need to sit there. Why? Because I said so. They're never going to move. What you do is, right, seating plan has you there. I have to give you an N3 if you sit there by the time I come round. You don't want an N3, I don't want to do the paperwork, so can you just sit there? Gives them the choice. I have had students go, I'll have the N3, and I go, okay. I follow up on that choice. But then it's not me giving them the N3, they've chosen it. Now an N3 is a 45-minute detention with the senior leadership team in the hall. They sit there, bored out their brains, silent, watching the clock. But they will choose that. And then the next time, what you do is when you're inviting the students in, is you sit in the seat that they want to sit in.
Like that.
And then you go, your seat's over there, I've got this one. And it works. Because otherwise, they will choose the N3 every time. You give them the choice to begin with, and then you reinforce that, and you know what their choice is. You know what they prefer. So you make the only choice available to them the one that you want them to choose. It's a bit of group psychology. There's a wonderful book called Dark Psychology. Don't necessarily read it in the staff room. You won't get ever employed at that school, but it's a very, very good book. In fact, it's 3 books and I'm wrapped up into one, Dark Psychology. If anyone is going for meetings with bank managers, I would definitely read it. I managed to get a mortgage using that technique. Seriously, brilliant. My technique is very much out weird, and it might not work for you. Might not. You have to be slightly, you have to look like you're bonkers but know what you're doing. And at the moment, not all of you know what you're doing, so looking bonkers might just be bonkers. It develops. The worst thing you can do is shout at someone. The best thing you can do is shout standing behind them. Makes them jump about 1.5 feet in the air, and then you go, gotcha! And it allows you to get the attention, but not have that threat. Works really well. Also, if you're going up to a student that's doing something bad, or whispering to the person next to them, or just doodling in their books, or doodling on the table, which is even worse, you just stand behind them and smile, and you wait. And then they turn around, and then they jump 1.5 feet in the air, and then you go, shouldn't be doing that. If you can take it off of yourself and off of the students, so neither of you save face, you're not undermined, they're not embarrassed. Mr. Stack, who runs the school, he had something brilliant. He said, praise in public, reprimand in private. Which is brilliant. And if you can make the reprimanding look like praising, look like you're playing with them, that's even better. Because the kids that are around go, oh, Mr. X likes them. And all the other teachers go, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And all the other kids go, oh, Mr. So-and-so doesn't like them. And suddenly you'll have students that won't behave in any other lesson coming into your lesson and staying behind for 2.5 hours doing revision. I have a student doing that, and I'm kind of like, shouldn't we be going home? I need to be doing my marking, go away. It works. The other thing is you're not going to win everyone. Yes, you are teaching the next politicians, the next geniuses, the next engineers. You're also teaching the next prisoners and the next contestants on Love Island. Hopefully you have more politicians than Love Islanders, but you never know. Is that they all shouldn't be judged about where they're going, where they've come from. They should only be judged in that moment. And don't, whatever you do, set a detention for the week after, because by the time they get there, they've forgotten it. And all you're doing is reminding them. If you give them a consequence, try and make it as instant as possible and as realistic as possible. Okay, you don't have a pen. What are you going to do? You're not going to give me one? No. And then they'll turn to the next. Do you have a pen? Yes! Right, wonderful. I'm not giving you a detention for not coming unprepared. I'm making you fix the situation, which, let's be honest, is what you would do. If any of you guys didn't come with a pen, I've got spares, I'm also not going to give you a detention. You're just going to ask the person next to you. If you make it realistic, it works. If you make it abstract or punishable, it doesn't. Any other questions?
At the beginning, you said like GCSE, you were really good, and then A level, you suddenly weren't. Why is that? Is that?
Yes, I've been asking myself that for many years. I believe it's because I changed from an AQA to a OCR exam board.
Oh right.
So I went from AQA GCSEs to OCR A levels, and so the questions that I've been brought up on 5 years in terms of how do you answer these questions was suddenly flipped on its head. I was expected to put myself in the mind of a student answering questions that the examiner wants a specific answer for, and you just can't do that. Or an autistic person just cannot do that. It's too much
Just
mental
a different way of thinking.
Yes. So, for example, there's a question, and I remember this so vividly. Why is the left-hand side of a giraffe's heart bigger than the right? I went, well, a giraffe has a larger neck, therefore it's going to need higher blood pressure to get to the brain, so you're going to have a larger left-hand side of the heart. What they wanted was the left-hand side of the heart is bigger because it pumps blood around the body. They wanted a general answer, because let's be honest, ours is the same. So why on earth were they talking about a giraffe? They thought it easier to put it in context. you will find some exam boards like to put in a lot of irrelevant context. Maths, you're going to find that a lot. William buys 50 watermelons. Calculate the circumference of one of them when he cuts it in half and finds the radius to be 3. Well, just ask them. Calculate the circumference when the radius is 3. Don't talk about watermelons. Context for some people is really useful. Context for others is a nightmare. If you can't decode context, you've lost already.
How do you get around the language of GCSE exams for autists? Because language is an issue, isn't it? Like, they don't understand the language. So how do you? Any tips to get around that?
It depends. Part of it is fluency. So you introduce keywords in Key Stage 3 that you use in Key Stage 4. Interestingly, in science and to some extent maths, you actually learn more vocabulary-based words than you would in modern foreign languages. Think about it. Soluble, insoluble, exothermic, endothermic, pH, acid, alkali. That's just your first couple of weeks in science. They are technical terms with technical meanings that you need to apply almost off the bat. Okay, you've got the syntax and you've got the grammar of English, but you don't necessarily have that understanding, so fluency is one. The second way that you do it is you flashcard. So I'm not certain this technique would work for you. I would suggest that you don't try this until you really have an understanding of what revision is. But if you have flashcards, you have 3 boxes. I tell my students to have 3 boxes: daily, every other day, weekly. They pick up 10 flashcards. If they get the words right, they move it to the next one up. And then every other day, they do a couple from that one, and every week they do a couple from the end. The idea being that Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, if you get it right, you move it less often. If you get it wrong, you move it back down again. That helps. Also, explaining how the word came to be. Exo, outside. Thermic, heat, so it gives heat out. Endo, inside. Thermic, heat, takes heat in. It's really useful to teach a little bit of Greek and Latin even in science. Methyl, ethyl, butyl, propyl. Okay. I'm not sure how that would work with English, but I think actually if you were to understand, you do go into context, especially in Shakespeare, don't you, in terms of how words are formed.
It's actually my personal inquiry.
Sorry?
Using morphology and etymology to teach English is part of my personal inquiry. We can do the same thing with metaphor.
Yes.
Meta beyond meaning.
I always put Greek in when I'm teaching English.
You're specialising in patriarchy and matriarchy, like to go in.
Pater and later.
Yeah, that's the one.
Prejudice.
So if you do that, and you do that specifically in Shakespeare, for example, do you do that specifically in poetry?
Yeah, any words that are Greek in origin, I will normally explain if it's relevant.
What about Latin?
Yeah.
Latin, no. I speak Greek, so I don't speak Latin. So.
It's one of those things where if a student knows as well, you will probably have a lot of different languages. I have students that I have some Afghan refugees that have joined the last 2 weeks. They bring Pashto in as well. Now the numbers for Pashto are slightly different. So their 5 looks like R3, so they were getting wrong answers until I realised that the numbers are different. Once I learned the numbers, I was like, that's why you're writing it that way. And actually they were getting most of it right. So if you bring in languages from your classes, does anyone know what this word means and why it means that? Photosynthesis, synthesis, making photolight, light to make something. Carbohydrate, carbon, hydrogen. I don't know anything, any arty things I'm afraid. Maths, expanding the square, well, you've got two roots, so you've got two axes. What does that make? A square. Cube is literally a cube, you know, add dimensions on. PE, for example. I'm terrible at PE. Absolutely awful. All I remember is the bleep test, and I hate it every moment. So give me a word that you would use, a technical word. Any technical word.
Biomechanics.
Biology, mechanics, how it works. Although many of them might go, I have a gearbox, really? And we go, well, kind of. Levers, things like that. Respiration, to respire. It does get more complicated. It is more complicated, and it's not my area of expertise in forming those words. But you will be amongst people that have master's level education in their subject. In which case, go to the modern foreign languages and say, anyone here know the etymology of... That is right, isn't it? Because there's
Etymology.
etymology.
ETY.
ETY. Yeah, the other one is a study of ants, isn't it? Yeah. In which case, you want to go to the biologist. Use that, draw on that knowledge. We have kind of finished. I've overrun slightly, but if you do have any other questions, please email me or come up and ask me. The reason being, one, they're very good for me writing a book. Two, I can answer your questions probably. And if I can't answer your questions, I will know someone that can.
Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions that people are going, I really want to ask you?
Some personal questions.
Yeah, I mean, do come on up. My next one is... Yeah, that's fine. Oh, thank you.